Welcome back to the class, everyone. Anybody who's been following our channel for really any amount of time knows that we love to make videos listing out different team comps, whether it be which teams are best with the least amount of Kyrotech, which ones are going to be the most useful for the upcoming GAC season, or which ones need the least amount of Omicrons. We typically get some comments, not necessarily referring to why is this team on this list, but why this comp specifically. While we do have those CLS and 501st type teams where we all know that there are 5 characters that are pretty much always going to slot into it, there are a handful of teams out there that we like to talk about where the community is really only decided on 4 of the members. So what we want to do in today's video is talk about what are the situations that will decide what that 5th character is going to be. And we have about 7 teams here total. I typically like to have a number like 5 or 10 that's more solid, but I also didn't really want to force teams into here that shouldn't be into here. So if you do feel like we're missing one team that you consistently see a different 5th on that comp, please leave that below in the comments and maybe we can make a second video, or if there's just 1 or 2, we can address them right then and there. Without further ado, getting right into this, we have Night Sisters, and Night Sisters and Zori are really the ones that inspired this video because, as I've previously said, I've made several videos where Night Sisters are listed in there, whether it be for an assault battle or for a Grand Arena team or whatever it is, and I consistently get questions on, Calvin, why do you have Night Sister Zombie, or why do you not have her? And it really comes down to the fact that it depends on what you're trying to do. Ultimately, if you're going up against an enemy team that has a critical debuff like Hondo's, I believe it's Captive, or Thrawn's Fracture, you really want to have that initial zombie out there so that she can not only take that detrimental debuff, but then also die with it. For Thrawn, he just stops getting to Fracture so on, but for Hondo, he actually leaves the battle entirely. Whereas if I'm going to be taking a much weaker Night Sister, Hondo can Captive whoever he wants, maybe he'll do it to Daka, and then you'll end up having Dash come in, assuming he's on the enemy team, blowing up everyone else but Daka, and then they just completely run you over. Now, the reason why we would want to use, say, Night Sister Initiate, or maybe one of these other weak Night Sisters instead of zombies, the Night Sisters really like to die, and quite frankly, Marin appreciates it, and Asajj and Daka too, but Marin really appreciates when those Night Sisters stay dead. So while Zombie will die, she will always immediately revive. There's really no way to stop that unless you defeated all the Night Sisters. There are some situations where it's nice to completely abuse the revive mechanic. It's not that common right now, but one of these strategies out there that does exist is using this team against Jabba, where you let everyone die but Marin and then throw it on auto basic and watch her rip the enemy team apart with Plague, because she literally will not stop taking turns. So again, depending on what you're trying to do, Zombie can be ideal with what you're trying to take out, but at the same time, using a weaker Night Sister is also a viable option. Next up is going to be Bad Batch. Bad Batch, pretty typically, I get asked this a lot, whether or not people need Omega as the 5th, and I get it. She's not really required for anything. She does cost Kyrotechs. She is now accelerated, so that is nice. And what a lot of people are looking to do is use Bad Batch to the same effect they might with Omega without actually having to gear her up, and I get that. Now, there are going to be some situations, particularly where you really do want the pre-taunt and the immediate stun with Wrecker, where Omega is going to pull out ahead of the other options. The other option that I do want to talk about, that if you're not going to use her and if you can essentially spare her, is going to be Shaak Ti. Shaak Ti, I think, will actually beat out Omega in some circumstances, particularly when the enemy team comp has a lot of weaker hits attacking out of turns, very much like Mon Mothma. And the reason why is because Shaak Ti has it in her unique ability that whenever a clone trooper ally takes damage from an attack, she gains 20% turn meter. So if you go in and you take it against a Mon Mothma or maybe an Iden or a Maul or something like that, she pretty much gets 100% turn meter anytime that Maul goes and has everyone assist at a turn, or someone counters and hits one of the clones several times back to back to back. Now again, not the best for every situation. Sometimes the pre-taunt and turn meter and everything that Omega is giving is more ideal, but that's really what this video is trying to accomplish, trying to say when each character is going to be better. Now, as we already mentioned, this is another one of the teams that inspired the video, where these core 4 are really what you do want to have for the Finn Zori team. And yes, Rose does definitely make the top 4. We've talked about that a lot in depth, and it's essentially because she allows everyone to expose through Zori's unique that would normally not be exposing, like Resistance Zero Finn. But anyways, on to the 5th. we have gone back and forth with both of the two different poses, and really it's going to depend on what you're trying to do. If you're going to want to lead this team on defense and you're trying to stop one of the middle groundish counters, we are going to want OG Poe. And the reason why is we want the enemy team to be jumping between the two taunts, not being able to get to Resistance Hero Finn, not being able to get to Rose, not being able to get to Zori. And when you just give them the one, if they, at the time when he gets damage immunity, if they can immediately just clear it off without having to worry about it coming on Poe, then that really makes it a lot easier for the opponent. Now, if you're using this team on offense and you can actually control who Resistance Hero Finn is giving a turn to, and you can control who Resistance Hero Poe is giving a turn to, then this makes a lot more sense to be able to spread more inspired and to take advantage of everything that is happening here. The issue with this particular comp on defense, and quite frankly, Finn Zori will do just fine on defense almost regardless of the comp, but the AI doesn't really play it quite right. And furthermore, the AI, when you're fighting against them on offense, they typically won't save their dispels perfectly, so they wait for Finn to hit damage immunity and then wipe it off. They'll probably blow it immediately because there are quite a few buffs on the team. Next up is going to be Jabba. We've talked about this before, where these are pretty much the core four for the team, but the one that pretty consistently gets swapped out here is going to be Boba Fett or Embo, and they really both are going to bring something to the table. I particularly like Embo more, specifically on defense. Him not being able to be crit not only makes him harder to kill, but it also slows SLKR's ultimate ability down by quite a bit, because even on the AoEs, either from him or from Lobster or whoever else is hitting Embo, they're not going to get it nearly as fast because they can't crit him, and that's how he gets his ultimate charge. Boba does have something to offer. If Night Sisters, again, being a very kind of off-meta counter to Jabba, if you see that your opponent does that a lot, this can really mess it up. But really, I think where Boba's going to shine most is going to be on offense. The AI doesn't necessarily do everything that it should in relation to Boba's execute. He'll see a few buffs out there and maybe launch off his execute where you really should be saving up for a big hit where you know for certain that you are going to get that kill off and maybe even reset the cooldowns on it and do a bunch of other fun things. Again, Embo will work in a lot of scenarios, but particularly when we were trying to use this against Leia, Boba was really fun because sometimes there are just a lot of buffs hovering out on that enemy Leia team. Next up is going to be Grievous. This one, and the reason why we're addressing this one now is it might seem obvious to some just because of the way the Omicrons break down, but I've seen a lot of questions out there about when Stomp is entering the team, who is going to get cut? And the answer is very simple. If you're in TW, you use DDK, assuming you have his Omicron, and if you're in GAC, you use Stop, again, assuming you have his Omicron. There are a few other options out there like Newt or BB-8. They typically, for most players, get sectioned off into other teams, but they can be useful depending on what you're trying to do. I particularly actually love Newt just because of his interaction with the target lock and debuffs, where he's giving even more turn meter to the whole team. But ultimately, going back to the topic of these two characters, it does just revolve around their Omicrons. And one of the things that actually really does kind of stink about Stop is that he has a little bit of a negative in his kit when it comes to getting dealt true damage that really does not get totally negated unless you have the GAC Omicron, even if you are using him in GAC. And that is going to be pretty important if you're trying to use this team at all on defense, because Bad Batch will pretty much just eat it alive if you don't have that on top of everything else. So Stop or DDK, check your game mode, check your Omicrons, and make the decision from there. And last but not least is going to be the Malgus team. So Malgus actually has several different fists that can fall into the category here, and we're going to be talking most about Talon as well as Marauder, because realistically, I don't like Set that much, because what you're really doing is you're giving your opponent an out to hit a character that isn't Malik and then ultimately get feared, and you really shouldn't even need a pre-taunt with the amount of speed that Darth Malgus is going to have right out the gate to be able to get everything going. I guess we could group Darth Revan into that as well. And then Sith Assassin really is just a worse version of Talon, having the stealth, but also on top of that, not having any of the bonus stats. So we're not going to really talk about the two of them that much. We want to talk about Talon and Marauder. So Talon is going to change the most when you're placing this team on defense and you're really trying to rule out General Skywalker as a counter. General Skywalker in general isn't a 100% counter against Malgus, but Talon, the fact that she's going to spend most of the battle in stealth, so they won't be able to counterattack her or really counterattack anyone when she's dealing damage. And on top of that, just the amount of raw stats that she's going to be adding into the team does help a lot. Even though she doesn't technically have the Sith Empire tag, and you're going to be missing out on a few bonuses that way, you really make up quite a bit for it with everything that is going on here. Not to mention, again, the extra damage, the stealth, and I don't think she generates as many debuffs as our good friend Marauder does, which will in turn feed the enemy General Skywalker team. Now, Marauder does have his uses. I particularly like this a little bit more in offense when using him, just because he has a little bit more damage output, and you have a tendency to not get stuck behind some of those really tanky characters out there, because he can reduce their max health by using his special, and then the extra buff, I guess, on top of that is nice when you're not facing a team that gets added offense or crit damage, or whichever one it is the General Skywalker gets when your team gets buff. So that is going to be our video. Let me know what you guys think. What other teams out there that you're pretty conflicted on the 5th, because you consistently see people using different things. And also let me know, I'm also contemplating making a video about which teams where the 5th just doesn't matter. I didn't know if that would be useful or not, but it was something that crossed my mind quite a bit when making this one. So thank you guys for watching, and as always, stay awesome.